Hello. This is the third and final lesson in our journey through the Suit of Pentacles, and in this one we're going to be looking at the 4 court cards. So I'm using, as normal, the standard Rider-Waite-Smith deck, but we'll also be drawing comparisons with 2 other decks, again to give you an idea of the variety of ways that court cards are interpreted throughout different decks. I'll be using this one, which is one of my favourites. This is Norbert Losch's Cosmic Tarot. These court cards follow the pattern of the Golden Dawn decks, but I'll also be using a really fascinating and profound deck, which is this one. This is the Tarot by Hermann Heindel. This was created in the, I think, late 80s, early 1990s. It was certainly published around then. This really has become a classic deck. It was one of the first multicultural decks, and Heindel's take on the court cards was and remains very original, so I'll be using these as well. Okay, let's start at the beginning with the page. Here we have the Page of Pentacles. So, once again with pages, pages always represent the element of earth, but in this case with the Suit of Pentacles we're dealing with the element of earth anyway, so this is what I refer to as one of the pure element court cards. He represents what we term as earth of earth, so this is a very pure representation of the element in a similar way to the ace, but in a much more personal form. So as you can see, he's standing at the foot of a small hill, and you can see that hill is crowned with trees. You could see some ploughed farmland there as well, in the mid-ground. In the background you can see higher mountains. He's dressed in green, very much the sort of green fruitfulness of the earth. Red hat, maybe to represent fruitfulness, I'm not sure. Passion, probably passion. There's the sort of, the sort of passion of youth in here. He's holding up his pentacle and gazing sort of quite wondrously at it. So yeah, as always, pages represent messengers. So in practical terms, if this card appears in a reading, it's very much like the ace, representing a new beginning in the realms of the physical, health, money, physical well-being, physical pleasures, the sort of physical aspects of work, sort of construction, making things, crafts rather than the sort of more abstract sides of creativity, all of those things. Think of him as a new beginning in the way that you would the ace, but this is actually more personal. This is in the form of a person coming into your life and bringing all those things, or guiding you into those things. Pages also represent a state of infancy or youth. They are in effect at the beginning of the court. They're the lowest ranking member of the court. So in practical terms, you're dealing with either a child or an adolescent. In abstract terms, you're thinking of a state of immaturity in a certain aspect of your life or the person that you're reading for. This could be when you've come into a new area of your life and you're in new territory. So it's all about growth and learning. With this being the element of earth, obviously it's the most solid, and in that terms it's also the most practical of the elements. So this is, if you're thinking in terms of a state of learning, this is hands-on learning. This is apprenticeship. This is, this is gaining very substantive skills. So yeah, the archetypal apprentice, the archetypal youth. Also, as I say, states of childhood. Yeah, this is somebody who learns with his hands. This is about the practicality of life and actually how we sort of growing into responsibilities, I think is denoted very much here. You know, learning to take, I mean, actually a good way of looking at this, when you think of ourselves as adults with, you know, with financial assets, with property assets, all of the physical things that we have to deal with in life, he's learning to deal with those. He's learning to sort of shepherd those responsibilities, perhaps. Obviously, not gender specific. Once again, you know, the Golden Dawn Tarot shows this, rather than being portrayed as a page or a royal messenger. The Golden Dawn shows this figure as a princess. So I think of princesses as royal envoys, you know. So it's a similar thing. It's a figure of youth, but also somebody bearing a message, heralding a beginning. Let's look at the Heindel card, actually, because these are fascinating. Herman Heindel created a truly multicultural deck. Each of the suits representing a different element, in this case the suit of stones, which equates to the suit of pentacles, obviously, representing earth. He used Native American cultures throughout the suit of stones. So all of these court cards are from Native American history or mythology. In this case, this is the myth of the White Buffalo Woman. And this is a fabulous metaphor for the messenger. She was a spirit figure who became manifest and who brought the art of the pipe and smoking to the Lakota tribe. So again, beautiful parallel drawn there. But yeah, even in this deck we have that sense of the messenger for this figure. Interestingly, this figure is not referred to as princess primarily. That's actually in the footnote at the bottom of the card to show what the approximation, what this card is representing. But the main title is the Daughter of Stones, and this is a lovely and interesting variation that Heindel uses, in that rather than having the standard figures, we have daughter, son, mother and father. So the archetype, the authority archetypes are still the same, but it's actually just a much broader way of looking at this whole set of personality types. So back to our standard page. The apprentice, the hands-on learner, the youth, physical adolescence. When this card appears, you're potentially dealing with the body's transformation, because this suit is all about the physical realm. If we turn it upside down, let's look at some of the negative aspects. This is, as always with the Suit of Pentacles, we're dealing with the body, we're also dealing with physical health. If this is upright, this is, a new beginning that takes us into maybe a healthier and physically more fit stage of our life. If it's reversed, we're looking at deterioration, the beginning of deterioration. So, if this card appears reversed in a reading, it does beg questions, how are we looking after ourselves? Is our exercise regime up to scratch? Is our diet up to scratch? If we have a poor diet, if we're not exercising, what's the effect? What are the onset effects that are actually happening within our bodies? So, yeah, there's a warning in there. In terms of the apprentice, if we're looking at the dark side of this card, or if it's reversed, There's a certain laziness that's actually being implied here, an unwillingness to learn, an unwillingness to engage, and an unwillingness to take on the responsibilities of life as we go through that rite of passage of growing up. What else can I say about this, really? Clumsiness, in its upright position. This is somebody who's learning physical skills. Reversed, somebody who is inept, somebody who's physically clumsy. Learning difficulties, if you're struggling, or if you know somebody that's struggling, when this appears upside down, that's also reflecting, potential learning difficulties. And that sort of leads us to say, well, what are the obstacles to learning here? How can we, if somebody is struggling to pick up these kind of skills, or struggling to take on those kind of responsibilities, how can we actually, if we're facilitating their learning, how can we do that in a more effective way? Upright, the youth, the child, the apprentice, somebody learning hands-on skills, the messenger bringing news about money, health, physical matters, physical assets, wealth, and then in other aspects, the physical aspect of emergent human sexuality. Even if we're adults, maybe, we're entering a new phase like that, but then, we find ourselves learning. All of those things. Reversed, obviously, you're dealing a lack of communication, and all of those processes blocked, hindered, or even resisted. Okay, let's move on. So we've looked at the page, earth in the element of earth. Now we're with the knight, which introduces air into the element of earth. So knights are the next stage of maturity, whereas the page is, potentially a servant or a messenger or somebody who actually acts under guidance. The knight has more maturity, thinks for himself, has a belief system, will fight vehemently for what he believes in. That's very much the archetype of the knight. With this knight, obviously in the realm of earth, we're in a very slow, very solid, very fixed kind of place. That is the nature of earth. So this shows in the image, the horse looks to me much more like a Shire horse, one of those kind of very heavy duty, solid pack horse types, rather than the sort of fast, swift steed that you would see on some of the other knights. This knight is kind of rooted, where again there's green, there's green space in the foreground. In the midground we see ploughed farmland, again with hills in the distance rather than mountains. His helmet is actually crowned with oak leaves, obviously representing his element of earth. In a similar way to the page, he's holding his pentacle aloft, but not actually gazing at it in wonder in the way that the page does. If you look at this, his gaze is more outward. So again, that very much represents the mindset of, sort of emerging maturity, belief, fighting for what you believe, I think, rather than, the sort of almost kind of intimate gaze of the page. His world basically ends with the pentacle, whereas this knight, his world goes way beyond that, as you can see from his, he's looking out into the distance. If you think of knights as people of valour, people of war, this is not the kind of knight that rides out to battle. This is a very solid figure who, rather than riding proactively out into battle, will kind of root himself firmly to defend his territory. And again, I think that kind of shows in the posture of this card. So what can we say about him? Yeah, to me, this is the classic guardian and protector, you know. This is somebody that you can really rely on to give you stability. You know, if you're in uncertain circumstances, this is the kind of guy or person that will basically stand in front of you and shield you. So let's translate that into real life terms. If he appears in a reading, so we're thinking in terms of the physical realm, you could look at him, if you were thinking in terms of health, think of a health professional, think of a nurse, you know, somebody who is basically proactively working to shield you from the effects of illness. In terms of personal friendship, think of this as somebody who basically just, you know, in a conflict stands their ground and really argues for your side of the argument. You know, they're going to sort of plant themselves in front of, you know, your enemies, and they're just going to say, yeah, you're not coming any further. This is a boundary setter, you know. This person basically stakes the boundaries and just, you know, says, this is as far as you come. You don't go past. Let's see. I mean, if we were thinking in terms of money, if this guy showed up, you know, this isn't somebody who's, if you were thinking, say, in terms of a financial advisor, this isn't somebody who's going to take risks with your money and get massive returns. This is somebody who's actually going to sort of invest your money wisely. You know, it may not get the best returns, but you can guarantee it's going to be safe. Yeah, what else can we say about him? Loyal, you know, will basically stand their ground to the ends of the earth for you. Yeah, so I think that's all I can say about him, actually. A guardian, a protector, you know, somebody who protects you as a person, somebody who protects your territory, somebody who protects your assets. If you want somebody to look after you, this is the kind of person. So actually, if he appears in a reading, that's what you're dealing with. You know, you're looking at a very key part of your support network. Or maybe, you know, if this appears in a reading, this is the function you perform for someone else. You know, are you caring for elderly parents in a very practical way? You know, do you find yourself gradually taking over practical responsibilities, you know, for people who are growing frail? Or actually maybe you're doing, you know, this is a role you're actually performing for younger people, you know. I always think there are certain aspects of parenthood in here, the practical aspects of basically, you know, keeping people, you know, keeping your family shielded, keeping them provided for, keeping them protected, all in there. If we turn him upside down, you know, there's somebody who, there's a positive solidness about this person, you know, in the upright. If you turn him upside down, this really represents inflexibility. You know, this is somebody who won't budge an inch. You know, they've not got the wisdom of a king, but if they decide that, you know, if they get an idea into their head and they've decided it's right and that you're wrong, they're not going anywhere. You know, if you go into terms of protection and shielding, to me, this becomes a very dangerous person in the dark side, because this becomes about overprotection, over-shielding, too much control, imprisonment. You know, you're potentially into the realms of emotional abuse with this knight turned upside down. You know, somebody who over-controls, somebody who basically stands in the way between yourself and other people. Yeah, so you can get, you know, in its worst case, you can get into the realms of, you know, of sort of, you know, unhealthily controlling behaviour, domestic emotional abuse, with this reversed, if that's making any sense. Anywhere where inflexibility and control becomes damaging. You know, this is no longer guardianship. This is no longer benevolent protection. This is, you know, this is sort of territorial, what's the word? The inappropriate violation of boundaries for control purposes, you know, territorial invasion. Basically planting your flag where it shouldn't be, planting yourself in the middle of land that you don't own, and actually saying, right, this is mine. Not very nice. Okay, so there we go. That's the light and dark of the night. Looking at the variations, obviously in Golden Dawn style decks we have the Prince again. Very much the same sort of figure, but obviously shown as, you know, a sort of heir apparent, so to speak, rather than, you know, a knight in servitude of the king. Beautiful card in the Heindel deck. This time the Son of Stones. Now this card, to illustrate the point, shows a figure from Native American history, Chief Seattle, who basically in the, you know, the early days of the United States, as far as I know, fought very proactively for Native American rights, and even gave a speech to the president of the time, which is recorded in history. So yeah, that's very much somebody standing up for his territory and standing up for his belief, you know, for his beliefs, but also protecting the people within his territory. So I think, again, I just think it's a beautiful parallel for this Guardian Knight. So we've dealt with, in effect, the two servant figures of the royal court, if you think of them in those terms. Well, figures under authority within the royal court. We're now going to deal with the king and queen, and these are obviously the authority figures, the figures of feminine authority and the figure of masculine authority. So here we have the Queen of Pentacles. Queens are ruled by the element of water, so we now have water in the element of earth. So if you think of, in physical terms, water basically nourishes the soil and allows growth to commence, you know, that's a really good metaphor for this queen. She is the nurturing, protecting female authority figure, you know. I think there is, you've got a lot of the elements of the Empress in here, but actually in personified form, you know. She's the nurturing mother, the caring mother, the protective mother. You know, this is a figure, this is a figure who sort of protects family and home, you know. On practical levels, this is a very green-fingered woman. It's not just about keeping a good house. This is also about keeping, you know, a very fruitful garden, if that makes sense. This is a very benign and kind figure, I think. And also fertility is, you know, is very much implied in this picture. It's a very rich and fruitful image. You know, we've got flowering or fruiting tree, you know, trees arching around the top of the card. If you look closely at the throne, you can actually see this fruit carved into the throne. She's similar colours to the page. Red gown, green veil. So I think green of the earth again, maybe the red for fruitfulness. You can see water here, you can see rivers or a lake. But you can also, you get the sense that there is a lot more growth. Whereas this is land that's tilled and ready for sowing, this has become fruitful. There's also, in the corner of the card, you can see a hare representing fertility. So she is very much the personification of the Earth Mother, and as I say, to me, this card represents all of those practical feminine qualities, all of those wonderful qualities of nurturing and protection, that you see embodied within, womanhood and motherhood in its finest form. This is a powerful figure, and also as a queen, she's representing a state of maturity. This is somebody who really has come into their own, and this is somebody who is responsible enough to wield authority. So yeah, if we reverse her, think of the negatives. I think the overprotective mother for a start, the clinging mother. But then again, you can also have somebody who's neglectful, somebody who actually has their priorities in the wrong place. If you were looking, if this is a figure in authority, or a figure at the head of a family, as a mother, her children wouldn't come first. As an authority figure, her own interests would come first. She'd be feathering her own nest before actually looking out for those who were in her care, which is very different from, the figure in the upright. Overprotective, smothering, practically smothering. Not letting those in her charge grow, trying to keep control. I think actually in the reverse, because Pentacles representing the earth, and because obviously, it's the most solid and immovable of the elements, all of these cards, when reversed, the control aspect of them becomes very, very overpowering and smothering because there's so much inflexibility. So, yeah. But upright, it kind of, when she appears in a reading, look to the, either primarily the female figures in your life, or the nurturing figures in your life. This does not necessarily have to specifically represent a female in a reading. It can be a man who is actually fulfilling those roles or displaying those kinds of qualities. She's very much the physical embodiment of the Earth Mother, and I think when she appears as well, it's very much, if you're looking at your own life, you're looking into those kind of areas of how you were nurtured, who was there to protect you, who is there, who's protecting me now, similar to this, it's a different sort of protection. This is a very solid, proactive, boundary setting protection. With her, this is the kind of nurturing protection, making sure that, looking out for your physical and emotional welfare, making sure there's food on the table, all of those sort of wonderful things that sometimes we take for granted, but we can't do without, again, not so much difference in a Golden Dawn based deck. This obviously she's referred to as the Queen as well. In this one, it's, the image is more abstract, but again, that kind of rich verdancy is implied. Beautiful, beautiful image. In the Heindel deck, lovely, the Mother of Stones. Now, whereas the daughter and the son, the daughter showed a mythical spirit figure bringing a message. The son showed an actual figure from Native American history. The mother shows a spirit divinity, the Spider Woman. Now, she's part of Native American creation myths. So I sort of love this because, I mean, you know, you get the sense of she's weaving the web of the world, you know, and again, there is, you know, when you sort of know the ins and outs of this myth, there is a sense of that sort of, you know, creative, protective mother going on there, you know, which is, again, it's just wonderful. Well worth exploring this deck. The deck itself is incredible, but also Rachel Pollack has written 2 volumes of commentary for this, very in-depth and in detail, explaining all of the myths behind all of these figures, both in the courts and in the major arcana. Well worth reading. Okay, and finally, to the king. So we've now got the figure of masculine authority in the realm of earth. So here, you know, this is kings are represented by the element of fire. So, you know, we've got fire of earth here, which actually brings conflicts of its own. Interestingly, I think he represents the life force. You know, if you think of the earth itself, I mean, if you're thinking just purely in elemental terms, fire of earth for me is molten lava, you know, beneath the surface. It's the actual heat of the earth that actually makes our earth, our planet, a sort of living, evolving thing, you know. Everything, you know, so much is driven by, you know, the sort of molten core of our planet, you know, including the movement of the continents. But also, if you think of fire of earth as the actual energy and life force of growth, I think Pamela Coleman Smith captured this beautifully, because when you look at the king's garments, it's actually covered in vines and you know, fruiting vines. You really don't know where the earth begins and he gives off, because I mean, he's also surrounded by vines, his throne's surrounded by vines. One interesting point is the crown. There's another recurring theme in this deck. You can see the base of his crown is a laurel wreath, but his actual crown itself is made up of roses and lilies. It's a theme that you see in the Magician. You see it in the Two of Wands. And it's kind of reflected not as directly in other cards, but you basically, the red rose of passion and the white lily of purity, and very often Pamela Coleman Smith shows them together. And I think it actually denotes a conflict here. Kings have to be stable, they have to be solid, responsible, you know, they have to be dependable. You know, they are, like the Queen, they're ruling, they're guiding a realm. Kings being represented by fire, I mean, they also need passion, but that passion has to be kept in check. It has to be kept under control. So actually that crown of the conflict of passion and purity is, I think, is really apt for this king. He's the most stable of the kings. Again, like the knight who doesn't ride out to battle, but, you know, basically defends his territory. This king doesn't actually go out, you know, to the four corners of his kingdom. But basically, he does open the doors of his palace and welcomes all to come in as he holds court. So, if you think of the kings and queens as, you know, wise, guiding, benevolent authority figures, if you're looking for advice, you know, he's not going to come to you, but actually this is somebody who is solid and dependable, and you can always go to them, you know. That's how he rules. I see this king as a very wise and benevolent figure. You know, if you're in need, you go to this figure, you can go to the foot of his throne, and actually, you know, you'll find a great deal of generosity there. You'll find a great deal of wise counsel there. You know, the actual scene itself, this is the most fruitful and verdant of all of the court cards, you know. I mean, I always, the scale of this didn't hit me. I always thought the castle was in the background, and then I realised that actually part of the castle is in the background, and actually he's sat on another rampart, you know. So that this is a very big castle, quite frankly. It's interesting that there's a lot of greenery and vinery basically growing over the ramparts and growing over the throne. Stability, you know, you can see the bulls on the head of the throne and on the arms, but also if you look closely, his foot is resting on a stone effigy of a bull. So there is, you know, presumably that's Taurus the bull, which is implied. You know, again, an earth sign. But yeah, stability, stability, stability. That's everything that's going on here. Dependability, wise guidance, prosperous provision. You know, this is in practical terms, you know, if you were thinking of this as a person in your life, you know, whether it's a family, a surrogate family, you know, what Armistead Maupin would call a logical family, you know, the support structure that you put around yourself, or, you know, the support structures that we agree to buy into with friends. This is the person at the head of it who sees, quite frankly, that everyone's okay, you know. Quiet, firm rule. You know, there's no, you know, there aren't sort of loud declamations from this king. You know, you go to his throne. You know, you take your needs there, you ask advice, quietly and benevolently provided for. I think we all know someone like this, you know. I hope we do. It's different if we tip him upside down, you know. Again, you know, we're into the realms of inflexibility, you know, that you find in the other court cards. Turn him upside down, and, you know, this is somebody who keeps tight control from his throne, but he basically keeps his subjects too close for comfort, so that they, you know, it's someone who restricts freedom. It's somebody who gives out support and sustenance conditionally. This one really can be a tyrant. You know, if you know, if we face him in his negative aspect, there isn't benevolence. You know, when this is turned upside down, support and sustenance are given out in a way that's conditional and in a way that's meant to keep you in place. You know, this is somebody who only just gives out enough so that you're not starving, but at the same time you've not got a great deal of energy to question, if that makes sense, you know. In the darkest aspect, reversed, think, you know, the number of times on the news when you hear of families of 8-9 children being kept in a cellar, you know, by a controlling father. You know, thankfully it doesn't happen very often, but, you know, we've all seen news stories like that where family members are kept prisoner for years. You know, not only does he hold his own kingdom close to his chest, he also holds everyone else in it close to his chest. Now, I mean, that's obviously a very extreme example. But then, you know, we can all think of sort of mild and more subtle forms of control and restriction. Reverse, think of political regimes that don't allow for freedom of speech, freedom of movement, you know, repressive regimes, regimes that keep, you know, that keep people tightly within their borders, don't allow communication with the outside world, that sort of thing. How, you know, I think when he appears upside down, think about how that kind of dynamic could potentially play out within your own situations. You know, obviously, you know, thankfully the majority of us don't face that kind of repression, but actually when he's reversed, yeah, that's passive aggressive repression. I think that's what this king is about, you know. You know, as the king of earth, upright, someone who sits quietly on his throne and waits for you to come for help, and then will give, you know, sort of benevolent, understated support and guidance, you know. When it's reversed, yeah, that becomes the tight controller who doesn't say much. This is not somebody prone to fiery outbursts, but the fire is simmering under the surface, and you kind of sense the malevolence, but at the same time, it's done passively aggressively. It's done through emotional blackmail. It's done through, indirect control. So, yeah. So there you have it. Light and dark for the King of Pentacles. I mean, again, looking at... There we have the Cosmic Tarot King. Basically sat at a table. Again, it looks like a palatial setting. Pentacle in his hand, pentacle on the table. All the trappings of royal regalia. Not quite as explicit as this image, but I love this deck, but actually that's what makes this one so incredibly special. And the Heimdall deck. Another divinity figure from Native American mythology. Fascinating. The figure of Bigfoot, but actually in Native American culture, somebody that is, it's kind of thought bad luck to speak of directly, and also, you never depict him. So Heimdall has actually just shown the footprints, which I think is wonderful. But this is, Bigfoot, I think, is a benevolent guardian of the earth. Not necessarily a conspicuous one. Very elusive. Similar to our king, staying within the palace, not necessarily being visible within the kingdom, but always there, always dependable. And yeah, the figure of Bigfoot, basically a guardian protector of the earth, and a divine one at that. So yeah, beautiful. But hopefully that gives you an idea. I mean, obviously this is only 3 decks. There are lots of different variations, and particularly within the Suit of Pentacles, it's drawn a lot of, there's so many different ways that this element is portrayed across a range of hundreds, if not thousands, of decks. These are but a few of them, but I hope you found this helpful. And that concludes our journey through the Suit of Pentacles. And actually, it concludes our journey through the Minor Arcana. And next, we will be looking in detail at the Major Arcana.